happened, and then I discovered that people were quite interested to hear about exactly what had been going on. So I'll start with a little bit of history about where we are and what we do, just to put you in the picture. So that's St Andrew's Church at Calstock. It's a very rural community. The church here you can see sitting in the middle of fields. We've got the Tamar Valley single track railway line just going up the left-hand side of the screen, and the River Tamar is just beyond. So we're right on the border of Cornwall, on the eastern side of Cornwall. This has been a strategically important place for about 4,000 years due to mineral remains that have been, archaeological remains have shown that there were mineral workings in the area. There's silver, copper, tin, all sorts of things around here. Roman fort was put up in around AD 50, and the white line on the map shows the location of the fort. And indeed, if you go through the down through the graveyard here, you can actually see the area where the graves are raised, because that was the roadway out of the fort going west. There was medieval occupation in the area, and the church was consecrated in 1290. And then sometime after that, the villagers moved down the hill. The rest of the village is about a half a mile down the hill, right on the river. And the assumption is that they moved down there because that's where the trade was taking place. And there was it was much easier to get to anywhere else along the river. So we have 6,500 souls in the parish, occupying an area of 6,000 acres. And if you're not into acres, which you probably aren't unless you're a countryman, that's sort of the equivalent of a 1.5 mile radius circle. So we've got, sort of just over 3 miles. If it were all laid out in a circle, it would be just over 3 miles across. So you can imagine what that is like, and very sparsely populated. Within the village of Calstock itself, there's only 500 houses. The rest of the parish is made up of other small communities and hamlets and all the rest of it. So let me tell you a little bit about our bells then. They were cast in 1773 by John Pennington and Co. of Stoke Limsland, another local village. They were probably cast in the churchyard because we're actually quite a distance from Stoke Limsland. Penningtons were a highly successful West Country bell founder who were casting for about 200 years, did hundreds of bells over that time. There are now in Cornwall only 10 churches which still have an original complete set of Penningtons, and we're lucky to be one of them. They're not brilliant bells. Somebody described them as rustic, and I think that's probably a fair description. They were rehung in 1892 by Stokes of Woodbury, another West Country firm. And then in 1952, they were rehung by Gillett and Johnson of Croydon. And you can see in the bottom right there, a picture of the frame, the new bell frame, and the bells at the Gillett and Johnson works in Croydon. They were important in Cornwall because they were the starting place for method ringing in Cornwall. A gentleman called Harry Trelawney, who is very well known down here, decided that he'd heard about this scientific peal ringing, and he decided he should introduce it into his church. He lived about a quarter of a mile from Calstock Church, and he got a team of miners and other people to come and learn how to method ring. So they did their first peal, very in inverted commas, of three 6 scores of grandsire doubles in 1864. And by 1866, they'd moved on to bringing the tenor in and had done a fair whack of grandsire minor. The teams were similar in the two groups. The big change was the introduction of William Bannister in the second peal. Now he had been brought up in Woolwich. His whole family were bell ringers. He'd taken part in a number of record-breaking method rings, and then Her Majesty Queen Victoria transferred him down to Devonport Dockyard and he got to know Harry Trelawney and started to ring locally and really kick-started bell ringing in southwest Devon as well as in Cornwall. So we've got a bit of history there, but we had problems. So For years, the bells have been difficult to handle. They'd been very heavy for their weight. The third was odd struck, and the tenor was described as lumpy. Don't know if that's just a West Country expression, but just in case it is, it just means it was very uneven to ring, very difficult to handle. It wasn't just our opinion, everybody said it. Visitors never came back. You get visitors who'd come and do, a court appeal or a district practice or something, and they'd never come back again. And Duff inspected the bells when he was compiling his book in the 50s or 60s, whatever it was, and said, they need rehanging. Well, we could never afford to do it, but we eventually, or I eventually decided we had to get around to it. Now, before I get onto the quotation process, just a little bit of background. I've been ringing for about 4 years. About a year or so after I started, I suppose, I became tower captain by accident. Our tower captain left. It's a very old band. There was no one else who was interested in taking on the job, so I took it over. And just hoped that other ringers and other area captains would help me out and make sure things went okay. And they did. And the first thing they said was, well, look, there is something seriously wrong with bells. You need to get it sorted. So get some bell hangers down and quote. Now, I'd worked in the oil industry, and in the oil industry, what one does is you draw up a very detailed specification and you ask companies to bid. Everybody said, well, that doesn't work. And anyway, I didn't have the ability to do that. But all of the local ringers said the bell hangers don't like it. Better to ask them down, get them to give their opinions, and then compare ideas. So that's what we did. But the important thing to do with that is to remember every bell hanger thinks differently. They all see their different areas of concern, and different bell hangers will include or exclude different things from the quote. So you've got to make that detailed comparison. And if you're getting a difference in price, then it's because they're doing different work. It's not because one is necessarily better value than the other. They are probably just doing different things. So you've got to make sure you know what is different and why it is different, and know exactly what you're buying when you sign up to it. So we got 3 companies, John Taylor and Co., Nicholson Engineering, and Whites of Appleton, to come and look at the bells. And sure enough, as predicted, they came up with very different ideas. All 3 of them said the bells needed to be rehung. That was the one area that they agreed on. 2 of the 3 suggested we needed 2 clappers. The other said we should just modify our existing clappers. One thought part of the frame needed to be replaced, and 2 of them wanted to put in a completely new ringing level because they said that the drop of the ropes was far too long. It is 27 foot from the ground floor to the first floor, but we've got a admittedly fairly iffy rope guide halfway up. But so that was the difference that they all suggested. The overall result was that we were going to be looking at costs in excess of £45,000. That was probably around £38,000 or so for the basic rehang project, and then another £7,000 because my feeling was, what the hell, we would need a contingency and there were bound to be other things that we thought of on the way. So the figure I presented to the PCC was £45,000. So we didn't know how long that would take, and so we decided to go for some interim action to ensure that while we were fundraising, we could actually ring slightly better bells. I don't know how many of you have seen worn pulleys, but this is what we were up against. If the pulleys are worn, I don't know where there's my cursor, then you get grooves in them, and the bell rope will catch in those grooves. That's one of the floor pulleys, and you can see the big groove along here. It increases the friction on the rope, and if there are any rough bits, like we definitely had on some of our wood pulleys, then you'll actually get snagging and catching. Doesn't do the ropes any good, and it makes it jolly difficult to ring the bells. So we changed all of the pulleys. Every single pulley got changed for a new hardwood oak pulley, nice and smooth. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of those, but there we are. But the big thing we did, which I I really enjoyed ringing the tenor after this. We put in a wood shafted clapper into the tenor. It made a huge difference. It changed the whole weight distribution of the relationship between the clapper and the bell. It changed the whole weight of the arrangement, and it just made it very much easier to ring. So that was a real, really important step to make. And for a very short period of time, we had the smallest bell in the world with a wood shafted clapper in it. So that was, you know, a bit of prestige. So we were set to raise £45,000. How do you do it? Well, the first thing we decided to do was that we needed a leaflet to raise awareness in the village, tell people what we were doing, and give them a means of, or information about how they could support us. We printed about 2,000 of these leaflets and distributed them all over the parish and beyond. So we actually physically put them through 1,000 doors, or through the letterboxes, I suppose. And we left them in local pubs and shops. The local taxi driver gave them to everybody who summoned their taxi cabs. We put them in Calstock, and Key, which is a tourist attraction just across through Devon. They probably have so we did all of that. As I say, about 2,000 leaflets. That raised us, including gift aid, about £18,000. That was a very worthwhile exercise. Cost us about £200 to print the leaflet and a lot of legwork, but it was highly successful. And then we applied for grants. Now, the thing to remember with grants is that it is a competition. Everyone wants the money. The people who are giving it may well have absolutely no interest in churches and even less interested in bells. So you've got to make your application stand out as being, you know, you want to give me your money, this is why, this is a really great project for you. Don't apply blind, call ahead and lay down the groundwork. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I had a lovely instance in our case where we were told by the Duke of Cornwall's benevolent fund that all of their funds for churches were handled by the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust. So I applied to the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust. And they got back to me and said, yeah, actually, we don't do bells. We don't do anything else, but we won't do bells. So then I had to get back in touch with them and say, yeah, but the Duke of Cornwall Street, don't we? And then they were quite happy to give us some money. So I'd saved myself a little bit of effort probably if I'd contacted them earlier. Do the research, make sure that the grant giver will support your cause, that they're interested in you. And then be prepared to wait months for a decision. The longest time it took us was about 15 months from the point that I applied for a grant to the point that I got one. Mostly it was in the region of probably 4, 5, 6 months, that sort of thing. But it's a slow business. And expect a high rejection rate. I think we lost about, or we were successful rather, in about 30% of cases. And that's even having done all the groundwork and told them what they wanted to know and made sure that they would support us, etc. You still only had a 30% success rate. Supply the information they require. If they want an A4 sheet, give them an A4 sheet. If they want a 7-page document filled out, then fill it out for them. Because if you don't do what they want, then you're the first one to go straight into the rubbish heap. Just give them it's their money. They have a right to ask for what they want. Just supply them with what they need. The big thing that surprised me was the issue of outcomes. This was a particular thing with the bigger charities like the Heritage Lottery Fund and Garfield Weston. They want to know what your outcomes are. Now, I was naive about this at the outset. I figured my outcome was going from that to that. Apparently, that doesn't count as an outcome. And neither, indeed, does going from that situation to that situation. Outcomes are what you are giving to the community, not the bell ringers, not the congregation, but the community. So you get the bells down on the floor and you leave the church open for 2 or 3 days so that people can come and have a look at them, touch them, see what they're like. You put up displays about bell ringing and bells and all the rest of it so that people can have a look around. Give them a leaflet when they come, giving a bit of history about the church, history about the bells, you know, thanking all the people who've already agreed to sponsor you, etc., etc. Invite the local children in. We invited about 5 local primary schools, which was around about 100 youngsters who came up. We gave them each a postcard, a pencil, a goodie bag with an Easter egg because it was Easter time, and various other bits and pieces to take home. And we asked them to write down, we gave them all a little sticky piece of paper, and we asked them to draw a picture on the sticky piece of paper or write something on it when they were back at school, which then the schools loved as a project, and they then returned the sticky bits of paper to us, and we stuck them in a book which sits in the church for people to look at. And we also asked everybody who visited the church at any stage to write something on a little sticky piece of paper to add to archive, but in current times that's closed. So there we go. Some of you might recognise this gentleman, Owen Borlase. Get a local man to come in and talk about bell hanging and the history of bells and all the rest of it. So that was an evening talk attended by about 100 people. And use local people. I am talking about contractors up to a point, but in this photo, the only guy who was paid was Kit at the end here in the green hat and the purple burgundy jumper, I suppose. He was an employee of tailors. Everyone else was volunteering their services. Grant givers love people to volunteer. They love organisations who are getting local people, not just relying on the grant giver. We organised a trip to the foundry and took 25 people up there and had a great day out. And we organised a visit for the bells again afterwards. We opened a church for another 2 or 3 days, decorated the bells, and invited more people to come in. So altogether, we probably had, excluding the children, about 450 people from the village came to see the bells when they were on the floor. We installed a CCTV up in the belfry, linked down to a television downstairs, which gives the bishop something to do when he comes to dedicate. But that's a sort of immense entertainment. People stand there before services watching the bells going around. They absolutely love it. And if you want to demonstrate to beginners about your bell going up right or wrong, then again, you can look and see exactly how it works on the screen. We ran a blog throughout the entire project, and we launched a website to tell people about the project and give them more information about the bells and learning to ring. We wrote a booklet about the project. I suppose I should say I wrote a booklet about the project, which was sent out to everybody, every organisation who'd given us money, every charity, all the significant private donors were sent a copy, the local libraries, the county record office, all of that sort of thing. And then anybody else in the parish who wanted one could buy one. And the company that did this, that did the printing for us, gave us a price deal because they thought it was a good project. So again, it was getting a local company supporting us in a slightly unusual way, if you like. We also, this is the thing I loved most, actually second most, maybe, leave best to last. We got 3 A1 freestanding display boards made up, again by a local man who did all the artwork and put them all together. One about the church and the bells, one about mining and quarrying in the area, because anyone who's been on holiday down here will know we've got engine houses, all over. The people who wander into the church can read this stuff and find out what we're doing, or what went on in the area. And then the last one was about growing flowers and fruit in the Tamar Valley. In the late Victorian time, through till after the Second World War, the Tamar Valley was renowned for its soft fruit, apples and daffodils and the like. So those boards are in the church on permanent display. And then the last thing, which I really did love, was we had each of the headstocks. Well, it's not cast in, it's not embossed. They are lettered. They 9 previous tower captains and 8 companies or groups of people who were significant to the project. And that was sort of, we didn't have any First World War heroes or anything like that. So it was adding to the heritage of the church in a different way. So they will be there as long as the headstock lasts. So Cyril Worth and Son was the removal company that took the bells up to the bell finder for us, and the Bohay family. I was quite surprised about this. I hadn't approached them. They have, I can't remember the word, those marble things stuck on the church walls, memorial plaques and statuettes and all the rest of it stuck on the church walls, because they've lived in the area for 200 or 300, 400 years. And we were working on the bells at some point, and this lady appeared in the church and asked what we were doing, and I got chatting to her, and she said, "Well, are you still short of money?" And I said, "Well, yes, actually we are." She said, "Well, how much do you need to finish the job?" And I gave her a figure. The next week I had a check in the post from the Bohay Family Trust. She just paid it just like that. It was amazing. So I figured they deserved their name on one of the headstocks. So what did we raise? Well, the PCC Bell Fund already had £9,000 in it, give or take. So that obviously went into the pot. Private donations, including gift aid, as I mentioned, got us around £18,000. The grants that we applied for, we got 23,400. The bell ringers didn't really donate £2,400, but there were a number of groups who did not wish to give money to a religious organisation. So they would not donate to the PCC, but they stated that they were very happy to donate to a club or a group. So we put in applications to several groups or several organisations from the bell ringers rather than from the church, and that raised us an extra £2,400. So that's, if you're fundraising, that's another thing to think about. Not everybody will actually give money to a church. So our total income ended up being 52,700. So plenty enough for the bell job and various other things. And to some extent, the money over and above the 45,000, a lot of that was provided by Heritage Lottery specifically to fund the outcomes. I know people have a tendency to look at the outcomes and say, well, we can barely afford a bell job. How on earth are we going to afford all these outcomes they want us to do? But at the point I applied to Heritage Lottery, I needed about £3,000 to finish the job. In fact, they gave me £9,500, and most of that was to cover the stuff that we were doing to entertain the locals and to display the bells, print the leaflets, get the schools in, etc., etc. So all of our outcomes were paid for by and large by Heritage Lottery Fund. And they wouldn't have just given me the £3,000 to the community to get the interest in the community. So how long did it all take? Well, not very long, which was amazing, really. May 2018, we got both PCC and DAC approval. We ran those applications along side by side. And then in August 2018, we got the faculty. By then, we had already raised the £38,000. So in September, we placed the contract. And that contract went to John Taylor and Co. And you then have a period where you're not really doing very much. In theory, but you're not doing anything with the bells anyway. We had by this stage changed all our pulleys and installed our wood shafted clapper. So you're just sitting waiting for tailors to get a gap in their schedule. But of course we were still fundraising. At that point we'd only got the 38,000 and we couldn't at this point have repaired the rope guide or got new ropes or done anything like that. I hadn't done the Heritage Lottery application by this point either. So we were still actively fundraising. But then March comes along, by which point actually we were still fundraising, but we started the job anyway because we've got that much money. Installing the lifting beams. If you think about it, you can't hoist a 1000 weight bell and cart it up the spiral staircase. They have to be lifted up through hatches, etc. And in order to do that, you've got to be able to throw your block and tackle over lifting beams. There was nothing installed in the church, so we first stage was to accept delivery of a load of wood. This is all vast stuff. Once upon a time, I did actually know how big all this was. They are 5 meters by 12 by 4 inches, and we were going to use 2 of them adjacent upstairs to get the lifting beams. So the 4 of them would go upstairs, the other 2 would be left for other purposes. So that's the finished article, these 2 lifting beams. The one on the right actually went into recesses in the wall. I've got some pictures of that going in. The one on the left here had to have brackets put up to support it. Temporary brackets, everything came down again at the end of the job. So Simon Adams from Taylor's came down, and with Owen Borlase, he and Kevin Borlase as well, they cut the planks to length outside in a very drizzly day, but they didn't want to make the church dirty, so they dangled it all out the west door, cut them all to size, and then lifted them up through the hatches and up into the belfry, where they were positioned. And you can see there on that wall the hollow, the recess into which the bells are going. So sometimes they needed a bit of persuasion to get them in, but ultimately we ended up with 2 beams, just like that, for lifting our bells up. Had a few final rings last quarter, last Sunday ringing, last call change peal, etc. With various different groups of ringers, because everybody wanted to have the last rings. So I divided it up with different people doing different last things. And then Friday came the following week, and we started stripping the bells out. So bell ropes down and labelled, 3 up in the belfry, dismantling absolutely everything, and sometimes all working on one project, and sometimes just resorting to hacksawing off the bolt if it won't come any other way. By the end of the job, we'd separated all the wooden bits off, and we had loosened every single bolt in the belfry. We didn't want to get to the position where the bell hangers would arrive and we'd spend 2 or 3 hours trying to loosen a bolt. So we made sure that everything, we didn't actually take all the bolts out, we just made sure that everything that needed to be removed would be removable on the following Monday when the bell hangers arrived. So getting the bells down. So this requires a little bit of explanation. So that's a schematic of our belfry, or our bell frame, I suppose. There's a chunk taken out of this corner here. This is because of the stairwell, which does become apparent in a later thing. Gillett and Johnson clearly weren't into keeping the stairwell clear. The frame sticks into it, which it's no problem as long as you don't want to get up to the roof. So it's a tight fit. The hatch sits underneath the number 2 and the tenor pits. So the first thing we had to do was to take the number 2 and the tenor out and put them on blocks over the 4 and 5. And then once that was done, we could remove this crossbeam and move it all the way over next to the treble pit. And that would give us a nice big space, and we'd be able to open up the hatch. So that was the first job. So there you can see the number 2 coming out of the pit and being set off on wood blocks over the number 4 bell. And there's the tenor next to it. And then we start lowering down. So I never did manage to get a picture from the very top. It's too frantic up at the very top. So this is the tenor going part way down. That's through the clockroom floor and then appearing down in the church. Now the idea was to get the bells between the arch at the back of the nave and the rope guide. And by and large, that was relatively straightforward. We managed to get most of them down with just a bit of jiggling. and down onto pallets, waiting at the bottom. One or two needed to be pulled to one side to get them past. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of time for lunch. I think this was the first occasion that Kit had ever had a homemade Cornish pasty, and I think he was surprised by the size of the thing, but there we are. I hope he enjoyed it. So that's the lowering team. And then by the end of these, we started on the Monday just after lunch. By Wednesday lunchtime, we'd got all the bells on the floor and sitting ready for the onslaught of people to come and see them. So at that point, Owen went off to get ready for giving the talk on the Wednesday evening, and we we'd put up all the displays that we were going to put up, and just got ready for visitors, basically tidied everything up, made everything safe, made sure that the insurance company was very keen that children should not be allowed unfettered access to the bells. So we had to devise a sort of roped off area. Fortunately, we had all the bell ropes, so we were able to tie those around in places so that the children were only allowed in there with supervision, which was fine. We could manage to do that. So all these things went on. As I say, we had about 300 people came through, 100 school children, and it was a fine time. Everybody loved being involved with it. And then we got to the Friday lunchtime, and we have to send them on their way. So one of the bells out on a pallet truck. The pallet truck was lent by a local commercial horticultural enterprise. Again, just getting people to lend things and do things impressed our donors. So we get them all down towards the, 5 of them there down towards the lich gate. And you will notice that the lich gate has got a coffin stone slap bang in the middle of it. 2 of the bells we managed to get through without too much trouble down to the main road, but the rest had to be lifted over. And this is being on a telelifter, being taken over the lich gate by a local farmer. That's what a telelifter buried in a lich gate looks like. And Chris got them all over the lich gate and then abandoned them in the road. Up until now, I would have said that Calstock Church was in the middle of nowhere on a desperately quiet road that no one ever used. When you start filling the road with bells and a vast removal truck and a telelifter, you suddenly realise that the entire world drives past Calstock Church in order to get from A to B. Fortunately, there were enough of us to sort of, manage the traffic, which is probably strictly speaking legal, but there we are. There was no one else to do it. But I was just staggered how many cars came and went along this tiny, narrow, remote country road. So we got most of the bells out, but there was one problem, and that was the tenor. The tenor bell would just fit through the church door by about a ½ inch spare, and we knew that it was always going to be tight. The thing I think that we'd all rather overlooked is that the church floor is lower than the outside world, and therefore we would have to push this half-ton bell up a slope to get it out, even when it was on the pallet truck. And you couldn't do that slowly with 2 or 3 people, so we had to wait until we had a whole group of people gathered to get behind this bell to push it slowly out. But we did eventually get it out, and we got all 6 bells on the road. You'll notice little orange stickies on each of them. I sometimes wonder what Taylor made of these. They were in fact put on so that the children could identify one bell from another, because they had a number of projects to do, like measuring the height of the bell or the circumference of the bell or whatever. And so they needed to know which bell they were working with, and we stuck little orange labels on them. But I often wondered if when they arrived at Taylor's, they looked at these and thought that we must be nuts for assuming they would need to know which bell was which. But there we are. We got them all onto the road, and then once they were all on the road, Andrew could size them all up, decide exactly what he wanted to do, and we started getting them into the lorry. So there's 5 of the 6 in. And then, of course, all this lot had to go in as well, all the woodwork, all the ironwork, and that was our team of helpers. As I say, Andrew, managing director of the company, Chris and John, farmers, Patrick, my husband, and myself, and Kit from Taylor's. All local labour, all volunteers apart from Kit. It was good fun. So Andrew drove up on the Friday night. Saturday morning, everything was loaded onto the floor of the foundry, and they started working on them. The first thing they did was to get the headstocks off, and this was the tenor being weighed. The tenor is now in the church porch, actually, the tenor headstock. It weighed in at 128.5 kilograms. The new headstock is 79 kilograms. So it sort of gives you an indication of the excess weight that we were having to lug around with the headstocks that Gillett and Johnson had put on them. There is a theory, I don't know if it's true, but there is a theory that Gillett and Johnson were busy going bust in the early 1950s, and that quite possibly they were simply using whatever they had to hand on a job like ours in order to try and make ends meet and try and keep the company afloat. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but we were certainly grossly over-engineered. All our headstocks were enormously heavy. Then you drill out the crown staples and get them ready for putting new pads on. So there's the pad going in and being smoothed off. And there they all are, nice and clean. And the next one with them all coated in carbon black to protect them from the atmosphere. And yes, and then of course there was the woodwork. So we'd got new pulleys made, but a lot of the wheels needed some work. And in fact, we ended up having 3 new wheels made. And then there was the lettering on all the headstocks to be done. So that's what went on at Taylor's. Meanwhile, back at the church, this is what we were left with. It's really like I said in one of the blogs, it's a bit like empty nests, when children finally move out of the bedroom, empty, the teddy bears have gone. It's like that. You go up to the belfry and there's no bells and there's no woodwork, and it's, you feel bereft, you really do. And so the first thing we had to do was to scrape this lot down, clean it up, sand away, and then start painting. Again, this was all done by volunteers. We had about 7 volunteers. It took about 4 days to do it. So 2 coats of red oxide paint as a protector. And then, this is interesting. Of course, in a belfry, you start at the far corners and then you gradually get closer and closer and closer to the stairwell. And you can see down at the bottom of the picture, the corner of the treble pit sticking happily out into the stairwell. And everything's wet, of course, all the paint's wet. So you just keep moving away from wet paint until eventually you're all crammed in one corner. So 2 coats of red oxide, and then 2 coats of our top coat. Next job was the rope guide. By this stage, clearly, we must have had enough money to do the rope guide, hire the scaffolding, etc. You can see it's quite a flimsy affair. It's a circle with 4 1-inch square pieces of metalwork come out and fixed into the wall. Everything was coming loose. There was a lot of spalling at the walls. There was a lot of cracked concrete and all the rest of it. So we had decided that we needed to get a couple of beams to run long ways across or from the north wall to the south wall, sitting on brackets to strengthen the beams. So that's them when their protective coating had been. It's funny, you spend 4 or 5 hours stripping off the protective coating that the company has supplied them in it so that you can paint a different protective coating on it. So they've got their red oxide coats on them, and then this is them finished and fixed into the walls. So we now have a rope guide that doesn't move around when you ring the bells, but is very nicely solid. We also had to tackle the Elegant chiming device. The device had been fitted in the 50s. It had not functioned for I don't know how long. There were bits and pieces of wires and ropes and hammers all over the place. We didn't want to get rid of it. We felt it was part of the church, but we also felt it needed something doing to it. So we stripped it down and got rid of the rust. Again, rust treated it and painted it up with a black enamel paint, stripped all the woodwork back and polished that and gave it a complete new set of ropes, which only go as far as the clockroom floor. If you try to pull one of them, nothing happens. So that it's purely decorative, it's just for show, but we decided if it was going to be there, it had to look half decent. So that was that. And then come July, the bells come back. And getting the bells back is pretty much the reverse of taking them up. They arrive back on the lorry and they're taken out of the lorry and they go through the lich gate. And you'd think that was it, next thing into the church. Pretty much, but there was one problem. This is the tenor sitting on its new pallet. Now, I think the only thing we hadn't labelled when we'd sent everything up to Loughborough was the pallets. And you may notice you may remember there was an issue with getting the tenor out through the church door because it was such a tight fit. Well, now we have the same tenor sitting on a very wide pallet. And needless to say, there was no chance that this thing was going to go through the church door. Worse still, you can probably guess that that pallet being so much wider than that pallet, none of them were going to go through the church door. And so Chris Facey, the farmer, abandoned pushing bells in through the lich gate, went home and got a chainsaw so that we could remove a chunk of every single pallet. This has certain effects on the structural integrity of the pallets, added to which the fact that these pallets were not designed to be used with a pallet truck like this, which has wheels at the front of it, but were designed to be used with a forklift truck. By the time we had finished destroying these pallets, A, by forcing the pallet truck under them, and B, by cutting off their ends, they really weren't good for very much, except firewood, I suspect. But there we are. Chris shortened them all, and that was great. We ended up getting them all in. We then realized that we had fortunately, the company that had supplied us with the original set of pallets said, we'll give you one spare just in case. And it turned out we had a just in case moment. So we wrapped removal rags around the headstone onto the last remaining small pallet that we had, so it would then go into the church, which is great. So they go into the church and and we welcomed people back in. That's the key thing about it. I had about another 150 people came in. We stacked all the woodwork at the back in the ringing chamber and had the bells at the front. Beautifully decorated by one of our local ladies. And then you have to install them. So you take all the woodwork up to the clock room and fill the clock room with wood. And then you can bring the bells up through the hatches, again, pass between the rope guide, newly strengthened, and the arch, and up through the hatches, sit and get all the bells in, bring the tenor and the number 2 up last, sit them on the wood chocks, and there we are getting the tenor in, if I remember rightly, in the last bit. And then you've got to fit everything. You sort of think, well, we're done, but actually none of your metalwork is attached to the woodwork, and you've got to put nuts and bolts in all over the place. I'm actually too short to get up onto the bell frame with these, so I designed a ladder that we could put in to let me get up above the bells. And so that had to go in, all the bell ropes had to be strung up, and then eventually we were ready to start thinking about ringing. So we ended up, oh, no, I forgot that a little bit. We did have to do some aligning. The letter J you can see is scuffed here. And that's because one of the bells, this is the number 3 pit, the bell didn't quite, it was a very tight fit, and it took us ages to make it so that it didn't clip either one side or other of the bell frame. But we, to get it absolutely perfectly square. But that worked okay. And then we're ready to ring. And so the first ring, we had a few gentlemen from Taylor's and a couple of other ringers. This gentleman at the front was our 92-year-old previous tower captain giving it a go. So that was great to have him ringing. Then we had to have the first call change peal and first Sunday ringing and the first quarter peal and all the rest of it. We're still waiting for the first peal, which was scheduled to happen last March, and then surprise, surprise, got cancelled. They'll get there in the end. And then come November, we had a rededication. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a rededication, but it's basically like pass the parcel with a rope. And the rope goes from tailors to the church warden, from the church warden to the bishop, from the bishop to the vicar, from the vicar to, you know, I think eventually it ended up with the tower captain. And now I'm pretty sure at some point I touched the bell rope. Needless to say, of course, it was a completely symbolic bell rope. All the others were hanging gaily, waiting to be rung. So we did a lot of ringing, had a big jamboree, invited all sorts of people to come and ring, and had a very great time. It was really good. This isn't to be read. This is just a lot of people say to me, what a wonderful job you did. And yeah, okay, I was leading it, but at the end of the day, it really came down to what a wonderful job all these people did, because we could not have done this without all these people. There are dozens of them. There's loads of people, bell ringers, people from the village, you know, people who have nothing to do with Calstock or bell ringing or anything like that, but just wanted to help. People were so generous. So this list got put in the back of the booklet that we produced, just to acknowledge people, along with all of those people, which were the groups that who helped us, who had their own logos rather. So yeah, lots and lots of people to thank. Lots of people got involved, and that was really good. Bit of a postscript. Okay, 2020, it says it was supposed to be 2020, but you will recall that I mentioned one of the grants that we got. We were offered it about 15 to 18 months after we applied for it. By that stage, the job was finished. And in fact, it arrived just a couple of days before the rededication by the bishop. So I got in touch with, but during the job, a number of people said, look, you know, the clock hammer, the old chime hammers, they've done damage to the bells, and they're still doing damage to the bells, and they're nearly 250 years old. It seems a pity. Have you thought about putting in a chime hammer? And having picked myself off the floor and thought, goodness, I don't want to have another bell job, people started saying a bit more about it. I started asking around, and there was clearly a little bit of interest. And then we got this offer of £3,000 from the Baron Bell Trust. So I got in touch with them and said, look, we've basically done the job, but it has been suggested that we really could do with having a chime hammer to protect our bells. What do you think? Would you be interested? Well, sorry, a chime bell to protect the main bells. And they got back and said, yeah, you can keep the money and use it for that. And so we asked around. Through the Calstock Trust, we managed to identify this little bell, which was being looked after by St. Mary's Church in Richmond. It had come out of a church in Hudswell in Yorkshire and had been sat at the back of St. Mary's because they didn't really know what to do with it. They wanted it to go to a church, but there didn't seem to be a church that wanted it. And then we rocked up. So they allowed us to have it, and Julie got the faculties all approved to have it leave Yorkshire and Leeds actually diocese, and be brought into Truro Diocese and be cleaned up and installed on a new headstock in the church. And so we got as far as getting it to the bell hangers and having it cleaned, and that's where it ended. That's where it is at the moment. So this is going to be the 2021 postscript instead. But we are extremely grateful to the Baron Bell Trust for giving us the funds for this. They didn't have to, you know, the original project was done and dusted. They didn't have to allow us to keep the money. But they've done that, and it's meant that we will have eventually a new chime bell at really very little cost to ourselves, which is great. So there we are. Thank you. Any questions?
Sue, thank you so much for that fascinating talk. You've made me want to come and visit Calstock, mostly for the bells, but partly because it looks like a beautiful part of the country as well. And of course, the problem is when you do things so well as you clearly have done, your name will go up for other projects as you've experienced. Just to, and Simon Linford says, inspirational. They are. The President of the Cecil Council has called you inspirational. Just to remind people, if you do have a question, raise a hand or unmute yourselves. A couple of things have come into the chat already, Sue, actually. First of all, Susan asks, I mean, you described the bells being lumpy at the beginning of this. Are they easy to ring now? What are the bells like now?
Oh, they are so easy to ring. They're a real joy to ring. We had a bit of an iffy patch when we eventually put the new ropes on them, because we did have funds for new ropes, because of course they were very stiff and stretchy and all very difficult. But now that the ropes are broken in as well, they're really good, really nice to ring.
Oh, that's good to hear. And Alison says, clearly you did an amazing job, and you might cry at this question, but how many hours do you think you put into it?
Oh, an awful lot.
Or days, yes. Or
I think it would be fair to say that from the point in May when I suddenly realised I needed to get the PCC's approval within the next week and the DAC approval. Our PCC doesn't meet very often, so if you miss the PCC meeting, then you've got a 2 or 3 month gap before the next PCC comes along. So that sudden realisation that they're meeting on the 8th of May, we have to get on with this. I think from that point, probably until about 15 months later, it was pretty much all day, every day, in one way or another, either filling out forms or running the blog, designing the website, etc. Yeah, full-time job, definitely.
Wow, that's inspirational. I had a quick question, actually, Sue. You won the Wesley Award last year. If I'm honest, I didn't know anything about the Wesley Award before sort of Alison introduced me to you. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the award and how you came to get it, and well, that really.
Well, I suppose Alison's a better person to answer that question. It was, I believe, it was started not in 2020 but 2019. At that point, a lady from another tower in Cornwall got a certificate as a specially commended thing, and this fired up the PRO lady in Truro Diocesan Guild to circulate out details of the award just before lockdown, actually, last year, saying, look, we've been involved in this last year, we should be involved in it again, someone get out there and do something about it. And I didn't actually do anything about it for ages. And then, you just got bored with periods of time. And eventually I emailed Alison and said, are you still running that award this year? And she got back to me and said, yeah. So I thought, well, why not? I've got nothing else to do. I may as well put in an application and see. So yeah, that's basically what I did. And, I based it on the things that we'd done. I'd drawn up all the diagrams that needed doing and sort of coordinated the whole thing. And I guess, Alison was kind enough to be impressed by that, and she and the others gave me the award, which is great. Yeah.
Thank you. David asks, he says, your presentation makes me want to come and visit. I think lots of us feel like that.
All visitors welcome.
When this is all over, COVID.
Yeah.
He says, publicity and communication was evidently central to your success. Did that link to recruitment and development of ringers? And how do you see the connection between hardware projects and people?
It was, I think I'd have to say yes and no to that. We had a lot of visits from local press as well, and that was great. A lot of the people who saw the bells on the floor were very interested to start ringing. And in fact, what we did, because Kevin Borlase and Owen Borlase are associated with St Dominic Church, which is not that far away, we told everybody to come over to St Dominic Church, and we would, start them learning over there. In terms of people who have kept at it, I'd say relatively few. We must have had 8 or 9 people who said, I want to learn to ring, this is great. Some were really enthusiastic. We had one lady who did it for 8 weeks, was actually getting pretty good, then went away for the summer and was never seen since. And doesn't want to answer telephone calls or emails or anything like that. So it's a bit mixed. I do still have some. I've still got 2 people who saw them on the floor who are still wanting to ring. But some of them just sort of vaguely got started and are getting somewhere, and suddenly you're not ringing anymore. So bit of a pity. There was a lot of interest seeing them on the floor. But one of the things I think we did decide collectively between us, that a number of the towers have had come see the bells, and people traipse up the tower very enthusiastically, see the bells, but then don't want to learn to ring. And I think we decided down here, it's better to say, come and have a ring, come and give it a go. And then if you stick with it, eventually we'll let you up the tower to see the bells. But but don't give away the cherry right at the start.
That's a good piece of advice. Nick says, or asks, did you have them tuned, the bells?
No, we didn't.
Again, some more technical questions. Peter asked, did you consider installing a ringing gallery?
A ringing gallery. Well, this was something that 2 of the bell hangers did think we needed. I think the answer is no, because I really like the fact that when people come into the church, they see us ringing, they talk to us as bell ringers. They give me apples in the autumn because they know I'm one of the bell ringers. We have a lot of contact with the congregation, even though many of us don't stay to the services. And I think we would lose that. I ring at other churches where you're locked in a room up above or whatever. The congregation don't know who you are, you don't know who they are. So no, I like being on the ground floor. I like having open access to the church. Yeah.
Thank you. Simon wants to know what the theory was behind going to the Heritage Lottery Fund so late in the process. Lots of appeals start there.
Okay, it was because, there are a number of reasons. There were a lot of local charities that would give away large amounts of money that we didn't succeed with. So we started with the people who would specialise in Cornwall, and sort of spread our wings after that. Also, I had heard that it was very difficult working with the National Lottery in terms of the paperwork involved and all of this business of the outcomes, which as it happens were fine, they weren't a problem. But when you're looking at it at the outset, I was having enough trouble getting my mind around the bell job and what needed doing without thinking about, well, what else can I do, to deal with these outcome things. So I decided to go get as much money as I could and only go to the Heritage Lottery if I needed to. And come the end, I got to that point of thinking, okay, we aren't going to get the money we need locally. And I've tapped every national charity I can think of without going to Heritage Lottery, but I'm now in a position where I can apply for an under £10,000 grant, which was much more simple than going for over £10,000. So we actually applied for £9,600 and got it with very few questions asked. So yeah.
Thank you. And Alison asks, are there any ringers on the PCC?
No. There have been in the past, there are not at present. And that's, well, actually, no, the last meeting, come to think of it, last meeting in November, we did get a ringer back on the PCC. It's a disadvantage, definitely.
Yeah. And this might be a question for other people to contribute in as well. David asks, I've heard of wooden clappers being used in heavier bells. Can anyone please explain the benefit for a 900 weight bell? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Sue, whether that's a...
I know it made, speaking as not as an expert, it made ringing our tenor an awful lot easier. And I assumed that's just because it changes the distribution of the weight within the bell and it changes the overall weight of what it is you're trying to swing around. But I don't know, there may be somebody out there who knows an awful lot more about it than I do.
Super. that's sort of all the questions that are coming at the moment, and being conscious of our time and your time, particularly, Sue. I just want to talk a little bit about. There is another question that's coming. I'll let you think about, Sue, before whilst I'm talking, and then you can answer, which is how much the insurance the volunteers cost. But I just want to sort of promote a couple of things before handing back to Sue, and then sort of saying thank you and goodbye. First of all, just to promote the next couple of talks, really. Next Wednesday, we have Chris Pickford joining us. Actually, this links in well with your talk, Sue. He's going to talk about the bells of tailors. So obviously, Chris is interested in history and bells there. The week after that, on the Tuesday, change of day, so just be careful about that in your calendars. Mark Davis is coming to talk to us about maths and bell ringing, so the connection between the two. And the following week, again, back on the Wednesday, we have our next Central Council and St Martin's Guild joint talk, where Gordon Breeze comes to talk to us about the impact on bell structures and tower structures, and the movement of bells and how that impacts on the musicality of bells. So the impact of the tower structure and how that can impact on, as I say, on bells. So again, sort of a couple of really interesting talks coming up. You don't have to be a member of the St Martin's Guild to come to these, not just the Central Council ones, but talks in general. If you want to be added to our mailing list just for the talks, if you send me a quick email at smgcbr@gmail.com, I'll add you to our mailing list for the Wednesday night talks. I've just put the link in the chat box there. Sue, I don't know if you want to, if you're able to answer that question about insurance costs for volunteers.
Yeah, and the answer was nothing. Any work that was done while tailors were on the premises was covered by their insurance policy, and anything that was done when they weren't on the premises was covered by the ecclesiastical insurance company that we were with, or we probably still are with, who would cover any volunteers and school children visitors, blah blah blah, as long as they were doing things that the PCC had approved. So it was just covered by existing insurance policies all around.
Super.
Yep.
Thank you. So it just leaves me to say a couple of key thank yous. First of all, thank you to Alison Hodge for organising tonight and putting us in touch with you, Sue. Thank you to everyone who came, who's come along and supported tonight. It's an excellent turnout, and really appreciate that. And so, if you look in the chat box, you will see lots and lots of thank yous. Fascinating talk, interesting talk. I can only echo those comments. So please take a quick look in the chat box. Thank you on behalf of myself and the St Martin's Guild and the Central Council. If I'm allowed to thank on behalf of the Central Council. Thank you very much for your talk tonight. It's fascinating. I know how much work goes into these, and clearly yours, an enormous amount of work and research that went into it. So thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. All right.
Super. As I say, Sue, please have a look in the chat box now, and you'll see all the things.
Let me stop sharing for a start. Good. Lovely. Wow.